So back March 28th of this year, this is something that happened as a result of this bill passing. Walters announced the creation of the Office of School Choice, which to date has not actually happened, but I'm sure it's in the works because there was this press release stating that it would be happening. It's supposed to be a one-stop shop for all things related to school choice and parental empowerment in Oklahoma. He wants all types of school information to be available from the state website. What does this really mean? The state website does, of course, have a page about homeschooling, but what really bothered me was that I felt like this created a false sense of authority that citizens would need to go to the state to get their information about private education. What was the definition of private education? It does not involve the state. It doesn't involve the government.
It's private because it's privately funded.
Right.
There being two categories, public and private, right?
Yes. Yes.
Privately funded.
I took a couple of days, thought about it. I went ahead and I sent an email to my contact in Walter's office, and I asked about it. I listed a few concerns, not every concern. The response that I got was I decided not to include the whole response here. His response was somewhat dismissive of my concerns. This was a quote from it. "I understand your reservations about government involvement in all the non-public forms of education." Well, the word non-public was not in my vocabulary at that point, and so I had not included it in my email to him. I asked about private education, but the response that I got included the word non-public. What is non-public? What does it mean? So I Googled it, non-public school. The top choice that came up was the Federal Office of Non-Public Education. Clicked on their frequently asked questions. This is question number 1. Does the department have jurisdiction over private elementary and secondary schools and homeschools? And this is not Oklahoma. This is federal. Okay. The department does not have jurisdiction over private elementary and secondary schools unless they are direct recipients of federal financial assistance from the department, nor does the department have jurisdiction over homeschools. The regulation of private and homeschools is primarily the responsibility of state and local governments. Yes, this is the page.
What does that say? Liaison to the non-public school community for the U.S. Department of Education falls into two categories, leadership and outreach. ONPE represents the interests, activities, and needs of the private elementary and secondary school community, and also consults with the private school community on the participation of students and teachers in programs and initiatives at the U.S. Department of Education. I was aghast when I found that in the rules to be promulgated by the State Department of Education that allows them to work with private schools and hook them up with the public, hook them up with the Federal Department of Education to get them money. This is wrong. This is wrong. And if you don't get it, let me explain it briefly and succinctly. You have only two categories, private and public. There are no other categories. So when you have a situation in which our State Department of Education is okay with infusing federal dollars into private schools and then even including the word private, when they talk about that school, they are completely wrong. There is no gray area here. You're completely wrong. Once the federal government, once the state gives money to anything private, because of the accountability and transparency we were just talking about, this is exactly why they then become a subset of the government, because there are only two categories, private and public. Subchapter 17 in the Oklahoma State Department of Education rules were federal programs complaint procedures. And I thought, what in the world? Why do we have a federal complaint for private schools? And
Mhm.
so I went down and I looked at it. Basically, we're getting in this rule, the OSDE must plan to take and disperse federal funds to private schools. Why would there be a specific rule added so that private school associated families can complain about private schools not following federal dictates if that weren't the case? Under the Oklahoma Parental Tax Credit, state tax dollars are going to pay tuition at private schools. Now they're non-public. Remember, you use that term, right?
Mhm.
Non-public. So private schools that are getting public money are now non-public. It's an entirely new
Right.
category. Now the parents of kids who are going to these private schools can complain about, well, they're not following this federal rule or that federal rule. I'm going to complain about Title IX. All of these things that Governor Stitt and Ryan Walters have come out with saying, well, we're not going to do DEI here. We're not going to do whatever. Well, once you hook a private to the feds, you have an end around any of these rules that you keep putting in place in these laws saying no DEI here. Well, if you're taking federal funds, you get DEI. If you're taking federal funds, you get Title IX, all of that, boys and girls bathrooms, all of that stuff in a private school. And then what do private school parents do? Because they're not knowing that this is going on. I would guarantee you they're not knowing that this is going on. They think they're going to a private school. Their kids aren't in a private school anymore. They're in a non-public school. This was all very under the table. It wasn't out in the public light. Unless you read the rules, you didn't know this was in here. And you have Superintendent Walters and Governor Stitt saying things that are not lining up with what are in the rules and the laws that they're passing.